Welcome to the Who's Left podcast, a show about Indiana politics, history, and culture from the unapologetic perspective of the Hoosier left. My name is Scott Aaron Rogers, and I'm recording from Bloomington. It is my honor to welcome to the podcast today a man who, I believe, has best documented the playbook the far right used to undermine American democracy, especially at the state level, and the path forward in an accessible, gripping, and compelling way. David Pepper. Pepper is a lawyer, prolific author, professor, former elected official, pro-democracy activist, and former chairman of the Ohio Democratic Party between 2015 and 2021. His 2021 book, Laboratories of Autocracy, A Wake-Up Call from Behind the Lines, is a meticulous look at the way Republicans and their billionaire benefactors have exploited the minoritarian institutions baked into our system to corrupt our government and use it to their own ends. The follow-up, Saving Democracy, a user's manual for every American, was published in 2023 and provides a roadmap for us, everyday Americans, to take power back from the wealth class. In addition to these two critical works of nonfiction, Pepper has also written 4 novels that bridge real-world politics and fiction, including A Simple Choice, published in 2022. His first novel, The People's House, earned praise for having predicted Russian interference in U.S. elections. The Wall Street Journal named Pepper one of the best political thriller writers on the scene. In addition to all of this, he publishes on Substack, where the ongoing series 2025 A Novel is an intimate, chilling look at what a second Trump administration powered by the Heritage Foundation's Project 2025 plan could look like at the personal level. It is a must-read and needs to be shared with everybody you know. Born and raised in Cincinnati, David is a fifth-generation Cincinnatian. David earned his B.A. magna cum laude from Yale University, where he was Phi Beta Kappa, and later earned his J.D. from Yale Law School. Yes, that does in fact make him Dr. Pepper. David served on Cincinnati City Council from 2001 to 2005. In 2006, he flipped Hamilton County blue for the first time in 40 years when he ousted the incumbent commissioner. He then served on the commission from 2007 to 2010, including as its president in 2009 and 10. David was the Democratic candidate for Ohio Auditor in 2010 and Ohio Attorney General in 2014. He was elected chair of the Ohio Democratic Party in December 2014. In 1999, David clerked for the Honorable Nathaniel Jones of the United States Court of Appeals for the Sixth Circuit. After 2000, David also worked in the Cincinnati offices of major law firms Squire Sanders and Blank Rome, focusing his practice on commercial and business litigation and appellate litigation. David also teaches election and voting rights law as an adjunct professor at the University of Cincinnati College of Law. Hey, buddy, save some talent for the rest of us. But seriously, before we get to the interview, do please consider supporting Who's Left financially. I currently work as an independent craftsman during the day and work on this project whenever I can. There are so many more things I want to do here at Who's Left, like a daily episode if we can get there, but I need your help. If you can, help me out with a paid subscription at scottaaronrogers.substack.com. For $5 a month or $50 a year, you can help me push our state in a better direction, and maybe if we reach critical mass, I can put down my tool belt and devote my full time to you, to this project, and to Indiana's future. So, if you have the means, pause right now and go to scottaaronrogers.substack.com and subscribe at the paid level. And while the best way to help this project is a financial contribution, if you can't afford it at this time, you can still help. Subscribe at the free level over on Substack. Set your favorite podcast player to auto-download new episodes of the show. Rate and review the show on whatever platform you use. Help the algorithm help new listeners find us. Follow me on social media at facebook.com/who's left. That is HOOS left. I'm also on Blue Sky at the same handle. On Instagram, Threads, and Twitter, I'm at ScottRodge78. That is SCOTTROG78. And on Mastodon at ScottRodge78 at Hoosier.social. Full video episodes of the pod are available on YouTube, and clips are on TikTok. The handle on both of those is at Who's Left. Please subscribe on whichever platforms you use and send me a DM to discuss ideas for the project. But most importantly, share our message. Forward the articles to friends, family, and colleagues. Don't just like, but share on social media. Invite others to this community of Indiana leftists. Nobody is coming to save us. We've got to do it ourselves. To those who have joined this community already, especially those paid subscribers, thank you so much. I am honored by your support. And to everybody, thank you for listening. Now here's my interview with David Pepper. David Pepper, thank you so much for joining me here on the Who's Left podcast.
Thanks for having me. It's good to be with you. I feel very close to Indiana, being in Cincinnati, and try and watch some of your politics there. So it's good to be on to talk about it.
Yeah. So let me start here by telling you a little story. My daughter is 16 years old. On election night 2008, she was just a little baby, and I held her in my arms. I was feeding her, watching election returns come in. Big night. That's the night Obama won the presidency. And more than that, like here in Indiana, I think it made us feel really proud because we went blue that year for the first time since LBJ in 1964. Things were looking up. We were trending in the right direction. What the hell happened?
You know, it's funny. I use that a lot, that Indiana was blue in 2008, because I think much more than even Ohio, which I focused a lot on, the Indiana and Iowa and North Carolina stories, and Florida to some degree, are really, like you said, that descent away from blue Indiana is truly striking. A lot happened, and you know, I try and capture it in my books. We could spend an hour just this question, but I'd say a combination of things. You know, mostly bad. We have a long history in our country of a fierce backlash whenever a diverse coalition gets its way politically. And I think we've lived through that and still are, beginning in 2011, that there was a response to Obama winning. It was a dramatic, historic day for our country. But dramatic, historic days in the past have also led to backslides. And one thing I try and remind folks is the historic nature of the Obama win wasn't just that Obama himself was a historic figure, you know, first African-American president, beats McCain. In many states, I don't think this is true in Indiana, although you'll correct me, in Ohio, that Obama coalition didn't just win the White House for Obama. It won the state house. We had a Democratic governor. And if you start to understand where the Republicans enjoy power, it starts with gerrymandered state houses. So when they saw this Obama coalition come along and not just cost them a White House, they weren't that into McCain. You know, it was the end of the Bush year. They probably thought they're going to lose the White House. And then you had the economic meltdown. But when that coalition also eliminated them from their own gerrymandered power in states like Ohio, Pennsylvania, Michigan, everywhere, that's when they had to do something. In the beginning of 11, there was not just a culture of backlash, but the institutional work of gerrymandering, voter suppression, all to undo this threat. This new diverse coalition of voters of color and young voters had come together and knocked them out of power in places that they had owned for years. So I think that's a big part of it. On the flip side, I think Democrats, and I was a Democratic chair, so I don't say this to point fingers. I think we all kind of should own this. We came to a conclusion before even Obama, but I think it got accelerated, that our way of winning was about dynamic federal candidates. Mm-hmm. And that's how we win. And so while the other side decided, we have to use our state house power to really ratchet down this new coalition that threatens us, Democrats kind of decided, well, our path is incredibly charismatic candidates who are so much silver bullets to other problems. They're so good that they win Indiana and they win North Carolina, and that's what we need. And when we have that, we win. And all of a sudden, and you saw it begin in 2010, and I lived this as a candidate in 2010, we stopped focusing on anything but those dynamic federal level candidates. And if you look at the way power is shaped, and this is what this first book I wrote, Laboratories of Autocracy, about, if one side is going for broke in all these state houses that literally write the rules of democracy and can pass laws on almost everything any of us care about, and the other side, to an extreme degree, decides any money spent on that type of race, state level in Indiana, is a waste unless it's helping us win our federal battle. If the two sides are making that decision at the same time, over time, if you understand that power is shaped largely in state houses, that's going to turn into a disaster. And that's what, so that's a somewhat short, that's a shorter answer I can give, but a long answer, I guess, overall to the question. Once those two trajectories really accelerated, one side going for broken states, a Supreme Court being somewhat helpful with decisions like Shelby County, letting them get away with that stuff that wouldn't have survived when the Voting Rights Act was being protected. The other side thinking and saying, hey, anyone running in that kind of place, they can't win. We don't want to run there. All of a sudden, you have states like Indiana that voted for Obama, Iowa, Ohio, in downward spirals of extremism so that they're nearly unrecognizable versus the swingy direction they went in, for you and me, it doesn't feel that long ago. Mm-hmm. And so I think that starts to build a momentum of itself that continues. So that's a long answer, but I think that Obama, you picked the right moment in time, because that began, I think, the most recent pattern of a backlash that, frankly, has haunted America going back to our founding. But in this case, the use of state houses as an institution and the Democrats' failure to see it until more recently, I think, made it such a decisive direction that we're all living through right now.
Yeah, well, and then so that was the whole Tea Party movement, right? In response to Obama and the all that there was a racial component of that, certainly, but they framed it as like a tax thing, right?
Right.
When that movement gained all that power in 2010, was it just a coincidence that 2010 was a census year, or had they been building toward that with their eye on that year as an important hinge point?
I mean, they clearly have been savvy about gerrymandering for a lot earlier than Democrats. In some ways, if you believe my overall thesis, which is they generally know they're in the minority on most issues.
Mm-hmm.
So they are more keenly focused on how do you sort of subvert democracy to keep that minority viewpoint in power. So they almost have to be more focused on gerrymandering. It's an essential tool for them to stay in power, more than it is for Democrats, who, for the most part, and we see this with presidential elections, through elections in swing states in normal years, for the most part, we win by saying what we're about. If they say what they're about, like Mehmet Oz did when he said abortion should come down to a woman, her doctor, and the local elected official, they're going to lose. So I think they were more keenly focused on gerrymandering, but the backlash effect, and yes, there's a lot of race to it, but yes, just to be clear, that aligned very well with what I have no doubt was already a lot of work being done behind the scenes to win state houses and to gerrymander. And that allowed them to win maybe even more decisively than they otherwise would have. And then you align that with more partisanship, more energy, the advancement of sort of data technology, so this gerrymandering districting process is now a science. That adds up to sort of a perfect storm in 2011. So the Tea Party, the failure to give Obama credit for the getting out of the recessions until later, which he gets huge credit now, but I was a candidate in 2010. The ads were all about the recession, and you would have thought that, although it happened on Wall Street under George Bush's watch, you would have thought it was Democrats that did it. They did that quite well. And so you put it all together, and I think what was clearly a plan and an eye on gerrymandering already got supercharged by the backlash effect we're talking about.
Yeah, and it wasn't just the gerrymandering, right? There was also voter suppression. Indiana was the original laboratory for autocracy there. I believe our voter ID law was the first in the country.
Yeah, not to keep harping on poor Indiana, but it absolutely vote. You'd think now, and this is something that happens as we live our lives, is people's memories are short. Now the idea that you don't have voter ID, people will say, "Oh, that's terrible. How insecure was that?" Well, no one had it 20 years ago, and no one was running around hair on fire that people were showing up in voting in person fraudulently. In Indiana, it wasn't just that Indiana did it that got it started.
Mm-hmm.
Indiana its case went to the Supreme Court. In the state of Indiana's defense of its voter ID law was so weak, they couldn't show any voter fraud in Indiana. And the weakness of their defense as a state was, in the end, really costly for the country, because the Supreme Court said, you don't need to show voter fraud. Because if they hadn't have said that, Indiana would have lost the case. So not to pick on Indiana, but it wasn't just that you had it. It was that the state's defense was so pathetic and without any merit that once you were approved with such a weak case, every other state thought, well, that's easy. And so, yeah, it's now all over. But, yeah, there was a voter ID, which we know has massive disproportionate impacts based on a myth of voter fraud that Indiana didn't prove because it didn't exist. And then you have, getting into 13, Shelby County, which, when it gutted the pre-clearance part of the Voting Rights Act, did a lot of damage. But basically that opened the door to southern states doing voter ID that couldn't have done them, even though Indiana's got approved. Southern states, under the former Voting Rights Act mechanism called pre-clearance, would never have had voter ID pre-cleared, because they could have. There was a different standard for those states. Well, there were voter IDs that appeared, I think, in one state. I can't remember if it was Texas or another, within a week of the Shelby County case, which struck down that part of the. So it was, voter ID, intense gerrymandering. The first wave of voter suppression in 11, a lot of it centered around early vote, because they were very concerned that, while opening up early vote was initially, in many states, a Republican idea. They thought, seniors vote early, it'll be fine. Obama organized very well around early vote, souls to the polls. So a lot of the attack was early vote. And then once Shelby County got rid of some protection on Voting Rights Act, then it took on voter ID and other things as well. All sorts of, I always try and analogize with Jim Crow, all sorts of new requirements, forms with new sort of spaces you need to fill out. You make one mistake, your vote doesn't count. Very much in the line of old sort of voting registration forms and literacy tests, which were sort of traps for people to lose their right to vote. That all began in 11. But yeah, voter ID was the first thing out of the gate. And then it exploded even more once Shelby County said it could also happen in southern states, which happened very, very quickly.
Yeah, it's like they're using the Swiss cheese model, right? Like, if you make it through one layer, you're gonna run into the next one.
Yeah, it really is. And they compound. And the other thing that if you read my first book, I know you have, the Laboratories of Autocracy, which is the title of the book, isn't just some sort of fancy name. They operate, these red states watch each other. They learn from each other. So it's not only sort of Swiss cheese, it's as if it's all passive. Once that voter ID law passes in Indiana, the other states all go grab it. And they don't grab it just on their own. There are groups out there. One is called ALEC, the American Legislative Exchange Council. Other of these foundations, like the Heritage Foundation, they will circulate the very law that was upheld in one state and say to everyone else, well, you should do it too. Or if a law is struck down, which happens, well, they'll read the opinion and amend other states' proposals to cure the problem. And so it accelerates in many cases because it's coordinated. And if you have 30 states doing it, you sort of have many, many test cases. Oh, if it works in one state, the 29 can do it. If it didn't work there, let's fix it. So in Ohio, for example, we have a very aggressive purging process. They purge infrequent voters. Well, that was upheld at one point in a 5-4 decision, a terrible decision. Well, that was, again, kind of like your voter ID example in Indiana. That was the moment where every other state thought, well, great, we can purge voters as aggressively as Ohio does. So, yeah, there's this, it's coordinated, and they really do operate as laboratories where they try and sort of pick up on their successes and learn from their failures. Another example, John Kasich, back before he was as moderate as he presents now, had a very, very nasty anti-collective bargaining law in Ohio. Really is like not quite as Scott Walker's, which is why it failed. What made it fail? He included police and fire unions in his attack on collective bargaining. Well, the faces of the campaign against it were police and firefighters. They crushed the thing. Ever since, they learned the lesson. Future attacks on public employee collective bargaining never included police and fire. They were carved out because they knew that's what sunk it. So they're always learning. Everything is sort of an ongoing experiment, and if something works, they repeat it. If something doesn't work, they don't.
And it provides this set of perverse incentives for these folks once they get in office. Can you talk about the kind of downward spiral that you get?
Yeah, I mean, this is the part that really I didn't even see clearly until I started writing my book. So let's take a step back. Gerrymandering is bad, okay? They're basically creating districts that almost no incumbent ever worries about. But then it got worse because, as I said, the Democrats started to think, well, if we can't win, there's no point in running. That's a waste, so let's not run. Or at least send a signal that we don't value running. So what happens? All of a sudden, not only do we have districts that are hard to win, I'm looking up in my book right now, the page, we have districts that are uncontested. Not 10% or 20%, but in many states, 40 and 50 and 60, and in Mike Johnson's Louisiana, 80% districts uncontested. So you have people in office who literally have never been in an election in November, sometimes a primary, sometimes not. And that's when the incentives really get screwed up. It's not that they have to fend off an opponent in a 60-40 district, which is, gerrymandering. If that's a gerrymander, that's bad enough. It's that literally in some states like Texas, they cancel the election. And then you start doing that over time. We're talking about people whose entire careers have been spent without a general election. Indiana, looking at now, 44% of your Republicans in the Indiana legislature, State House in 2022 were uncontested. That's 3 million Indiana Hoosiers who did not have a choice. Now, when you start getting to that level, and by the way, if that's about 44% is horribly high. But that's about average in 22. That you're right in the middle, I would say. What happens when you literally have no opponent? That's when the incentives get truly screwed up. So I was a commissioner in a 50-50 county. We have Hamilton. You have a Hamilton County there?
Well, we do. Hamilton is our Indianapolis.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Well, I was the Hamilton County, Ohio commissioner, which is Cincinnati. Wonderful names, right? When I was in my Hamilton County commission slot, I had a 50-50 county. It was a straight-up toss-up. That means that as an elected official, I knew to get reelected, one, I better do a good job delivering good public outcomes, or I would lose. I beat my opponent. I unseated an incumbent because he did do a good job, and I was able to expose the poor public outcomes. I also had an incentive to be mainstream. In a 50-50 county, if I were off on some wild extreme issues, I'd lose. You're in a guaranteed district that you don't even have an election. That first incentive just disappears. You can literally do the worst job ever. You can destroy your schools, have bad health care, not invest in infrastructure. None of it matters. You get reelected because you don't even have an opponent. You do, though, worry about the primary. That's the problem for you. My problem was the general as a county commissioner. Your problem in a guaranteed election is the primary. How do you stave off a primary? You become extreme. Because if you're a rhino, you will lose. We see it all the time. If you work with Democrats as a Republican, you will lose. So you have an incentive to be an extremist. And here's the other one that is very important, although it's slightly less obvious than being extremist. Private interests can cost you your election in that primary, even if in the general they can't. They can spend big money, and they're more and more likely to do this. Who's that? Who are those interests? It's largely, in many of these states, the people seeking public funds and public power to benefit their private interests. In Ohio, for-profit schools. In Ohio, utilities that want to bail out. Payday lenders. We've had terrible influence of the worst of the fracking folks who basically don't want any regulation, even for people leaking. I mean, terrible. Well, they can get involved in a primary and crush you. They can get involved in a primary, support an extremist, you're done. So the other incentive you have in these very broken systems is you have no incentive to keep the public happy, but you want to keep the handful of private players who own that state house very happy. And because those state house players generally want something from the public side, you're kind of giving things to them that hurt public outcomes. We've seen this in Ohio where giveaways to private for-profit scam schools have contributed to us falling from 5th in the nation in our quality of public education to the mid-20s in 12 years. High tuition.
We would love mid-20s around here.
Right. But we have plummeted over the course of the downward spiral that we've talked about. We have plummeted from 5th to mid-20s. It's outrageous. We have the highest student debt in the country. I can go on and on. But the point is, the same people pushing the policies that took us from 5th to 26 aren't only still there, they do better by those results, because what the public can't punish them for falling 26, but the private players who've made profits out of the fact that they now get public school money are keeping those people from being opposed in a primary, and they're giving them money along the way. And so they literally have this crazy incentive to essentially not be public servants at all. My thesis is these state houses in these unaccountable, gerrymandered, and uncontested hands are not about public service. That is the reality that all of us have to see. They are doing a form of private service using public assets and public power to serve those interests. And that's why in all these states, you joked about being not even 26. In all these states where this is happening, the public outcomes are indefensible. Great places, great communities are seeing no infrastructure, bad health care. Local schools they are proud of robbed of funds to send to some private for-profit school or private, high-end school 100 miles away, and no one can stop it, and the politicians are rewarded for all of it. And so the incentives, so that's why you see this downward spiral. And I believe, the politicians in state houses like Indiana or Ohio, they want to convince their constituents, if they even talk to them, because they don't have to, because they don't have a general election. Oh, the problem with our schools is CRT or critical race theory or groomers or the border. No, it's you. You took the money away. You gave it to some scam that delivered terrible education. But because there's no one even running against them, they get away with changing the subject but the problem. So that's just, and one of the more, so I wrote a book that basically tried to describe this dynamic in Ohio. And the minute I published it, one of the first emails I got was from Indiana, but I get them from all over the country. David, your book described exactly what's happening in my state. So this is a pattern nationwide. And my frustration is it will not be solved until all of us see that the source of this problem are the state level actors we're talking about. And until we bring accountability to them through state and national reforms and accountability, we can win White Houses and Senate seats, and we need to, but everything that you and I are going through in our states will continue unabated until we decide we've got to start contesting and bringing some accountability back at this level that we used to, but we stopped doing, especially in the last, several decades, I'd say.
Yeah. Now, so now on one hand, that is up to us in the States, and number one, just running in these uncontested races and then supporting people that do, and and turning out and putting in the work every day. But on the other hand, like also you mentioned, there is a role for the federal government
Totally.
to play here. It is a constitutional mandate that they
Yeah.
guarantee states a Republican form of government,
Yeah.
and it sounds like a lot of us red states don't actually have that.
No, I mean that was sort of my big aha, which is there's a clause in the U.S. Constitution. I think it's Article 4, Section 4. It's called the Guarantee Clause. It gets almost no attention. It was like the disqualification clause. No one even thought about it until Trump disqualified himself by being part of insurrection. But this clause says that the federal government, or something like this, shall guarantee to all states in the Union a Republican form of government. And we know what they meant by Republican form of government. They meant basically what we call democracy, a majority rules system of elected representation that generally comports with the rule of law, but also especially the long-term notion that the majority, this was the breakthrough of the national republic, that the majority of the people, it was majoritarianism, generally, unlike the monarchy of the crown or something, they set the direction of their government. And that doesn't mean every vote needs to poll at 55%. But structurally, that government should reflect the interests of the people and not the interests of just a small number of people, particularly the minority. That was sort of the breakthrough. And I think once you have these gerrymandered systems with no accountability for half the people, which leads to representation of the extremists of that state, be they private interests or other groups, abortion bans, no exceptions, being the law when only 10% of the state's citizenry agree with that law systematically in all these states. Yeah, that is truly, I mean, if you read the Republican form of government clause, which is shall guarantee, the federal government the United States says, shall guarantee, meaning this is an essential premise of being an American state. You live in a state that's a functioning democracy. That, as you said, I don't believe we do right now. I believe these states are so gerrymandered, and their laws reflect so much the intense minority of that state that it's pretty hard to maintain that they are. And I do put in my books that I think the federal government should do more about this fatal flaw in America right now, which is that the heart of where we shape democracy themselves are not functioning democracies. I want to be clear about something. I'm not saying that if we had fair districts in Ohio and contested elections, we wouldn't have a Republican majority most of the time. We probably would. Indiana probably would too. But it would be a different majority. It wouldn't be a majority of extremists who represent 10% of Indianans or Hoosiers. It would be probably some more extreme from certain areas. Others would be more moderate. It would generally reflect your state. So I'm not saying every red state is automatically. I'm not some Democrat saying, "Oh, you're a Republican state. You're not a Republican form of government." That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is we have these institutions are so broken. Careers spent entirely with no elections. You and I could look at a map and predict 99% of the outcomes of every district in our states at every level for the next 10 years from the map today. That's not a Republican form of government. And I think it's incumbent on political actors in states to see that. But as you said, I think it's incumbent on U.S. senators, the president of the United States, and others to see when they take an oath to the Constitution of the United States, they are taking an oath to uphold the guarantee of a Republican form of government. And there should be more passion about the need to uphold that guarantee than there is. So that's sort of my common law section of my book. But I think this isn't just sort of what's right. It's not some sort of sense of just doing the right thing or democracy. This is as much a part of the Constitution as the First Amendment. And you wouldn't know it based on how we sort of allow all this to continue without really the kind of fight I think we should be engaged in to protect democracy in states.
You hinted at it at the beginning, and I think you just said it right there. It's a fight, a kind of different fight than we're actually fighting,
Right.
right? And you sort of open up the sequel, your Saving Democracy book, by talking about the two battles. And I think you capture something in there that a lot of us on the left like just feel intuitive.
Right.
Like the Democrats just aren't even playing the same game as Republicans. Can you talk about that?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, the way I put it is, and you started out with the perfect question, and I start some of my speeches with this. Don't you look back and remember these amazing moments like Obama winning and Trump losing in 20? And we remember how victorious we felt in our huge celebrations. And when we look back, we realize that within only a few years or a few months, we realized we hadn't really won at all.
Mm-hmm.
And people are like, yeah, I do. That is true. And then I'll say, well, doesn't that cry out as an alarm that if you, I don't care if it's sports or politics or law or business, if you look back and you thought you were winning and it turns out you weren't, that's a real problem in your game plan. I mean, that should be a wake-up call that, God, I was celebrating and I was losing. What was I doing? That's kind of been the story. And the minute you see that that's true, then that's when you realize, well, it must be because we're doing, like the other side and we are doing something different enough that what I perceived as a victory for us, somehow they were still winning too. That tells you they've got a different game plan than we thought and then ours. And that's when I get through the two battles, which is, our side, and I mentioned this early on, our side is largely fighting a federal battle, assuming democracy is more or less intact. We celebrate winning because of that. If we win the 5 or 6 swing states at the federal seats that get us majorities for president or Senate or House, we celebrate. We won. That's our battle. That's literally what we thought. We have defined success in the battle for democracy as swing seats in swing states to get us federal majority. And when did we celebrate? Obama in 08, us in 20, when we won Georgia in January 21. We celebrate because we had defined the battle that way. Well, that's not the other side's battle. They want to win those seats, of course. That's sort of for them the peak moment of victory. But the other side's battle is I've talked about a little bit, but I'll say more now, is they actually know that their views are unpopular. They know that winning that federal swing state battle, frankly, waging only that battle, they know is actually a loser for them. It's Fetterman beating Oz. It's Walker losing to Warnock. That's a loser for them because their viewpoints are generally unpopular. The heart of their battle is not winning elections on a fair playing field. That's not what they're going to. They will not succeed if that's their battle. They need to figure out how do they subvert democracy enough to win with views that most Americans don't agree with, abortion bans and crazy gun laws that even gun owners disagree with, and trickle-down economics that don't help most people. How do you win with those sets of views? You have to do it differently. And how do they do it? Subvert democracy enough. This very Orban-ish, the guy from Hungary, to subvert democracy enough to lock in a minority worldview that would never win in fair elections. And how do you do that? You win state houses. And you win the offices that sort of surround state houses, and the right hands on our side could hold them accountable, which they don't like, and their hands could allow everything they do in state houses to continue. State Supreme Courts, state auditors. But the heart of it are gerrymandered state houses. Win them, gerrymander the hell out of them, suppress the vote of the other side, and then launch that extreme agenda through those state houses, which deal with every substantive issue in the world, but lock it all in through gerrymandered voter suppression. That's their battle. They go for every state they can win, not just swing states. They do it every year, not just presidential. And when they win, they can ratchet the state down, as they've done in Indiana, Ohio, to make it harder for us the next time. So why are they winning? Because I joke about this in my book. It's not a very funny joke, but it's true. Like, my son Jack, who plays soccer at 9 years old, knows why they're winning. They're the soccer team that's always on offense. Their state houses are their forwards. kicking the ball at our goal. Ohio, Mississippi, Indiana, Missouri, those state houses are their forwards. They're kicking, they're kicking, they're kicking. We've got like federal officials in the goal trying to play defense, right? Stop the goal, stop the shot. But when you're not running in half the districts, you're not even blocking the kicks. And in any game where they're having uncontested shots at your goal, they're going to keep scoring. I don't care how good your goalie is. I don't care how many great centers you have. They're going to score.
Mm-hmm.
And what's our response when they score, like they did in Dobbs out of Mississippi? That was a state level. We start saying, well, they're going to do something nationally. We need more U.S. senators. It's not who voted for that Mississippi and let's run them out of office. Let's go on offense. They passed a toxic bill. It turned America upside down. Let's take them on. She was uncontested the next election. So that's a lose. So they're shooting, and it'd be as if you looked at a soccer game where forwards are shooting uncontested shots, and whenever they score, we all scratch our head and say, if only we had a better goalie, we win the game. I mean, that's just not a rational response. So their battle is that offense, state-based battle, nonstop shooting. Ours is federal, and here's the other really hard part. Their state-level battle makes our federal battle harder because of voter suppression, because of purging, because of gerrymandering. So it doesn't really help them do what they want to do at states. When the voting population of Cleveland is smaller due to purging and early vote is harder and voter ID has carved out big parts of the electorate, it makes our federal battle harder too. It makes Sherrod Brown's reelection harder. In over 12 years, the Ohio electorate looks very different because of those things. So they care about the state houses, of course, but in long game, they want to win the federal battles, and their state monopoly of power makes it harder for us to do well in the federal battle we care about as well. So they're getting both from their battle, and when we lose states and don't pay attention to them, we're losing not just states, but long term, we're making our federal battle that much harder.
So you say Democrats and the larger pro-democracy team in general needs to go on offense. What does that look like?
One, it means regardless of how tough these districts are, and this is very hard to get people to see, but it's starting. I give credit to a lot of the state chairs and others. We got to run everywhere. They are running their entire extremist agenda through largely rural, uncontested districts of states like yours and mine. And we see it, and it's like a superhighway of extremism. Things that Mitch McConnell would never let go to the Senate because it'd be too toxic, running right through these states. It's a superhighway of extremism. And when I-74, when we, Cincinnati to Indianapolis, when we don't run, it's like we're standing back saying, oh, go right on through with your highway. We don't care. Keep doing it. We won't even run against you, so the voters in your districts won't even know about it. So the first step is, and I don't care where you are, you start running. Not because you're going to win all these districts. You're not going to win most of them. But because running is a public service in the battle for democracy, and that you're exposing what they're doing. You're bringing transparency. You're bringing choice back. You're potentially winning, and that happens. An Alabama candidate won a few months ago in Alabama because it came right after that IVF decision. So you're going to win some too. But if you don't run, that not running is sort of the key killer of all this. It's the part that really gets us incentive screwed up. Some of these people never had an opponent. If they have an opponent knocking on doors in their district, even if it's a very favorable district, they'll start to hear from their neighbors, geez, I didn't know you voted for that ridiculous bill. I thought you were the nice neighbor down the street who looked great in parades and always shook my hand, but what you're up to in that state house is horrible. They don't hear that. And by the way, when they've been running uncontested for years, even that feedback starts to get at them. I've seen this. They don't like that criticism. They don't want the story in the paper of a forum where their opponent explained how they gave away all the school money to some private scam or a big private voucher program. If they don't face that, they'll never change their behavior. Even if they win with the contest, they'll have more pause. There's some accountability coming from the center and not just the right. So that's going on offense. 50 states everywhere. That needs to be the new default. It won't always be achieved. It's hard to run in these places, but the default from which we start should be that. And when we don't get to it, we should wonder what went wrong. How do we do better? There's a lot of other things. I can't, it's recognizing that the State House is the core of the battle for democracy. It's their core. It needs to be ours. It's recognizing that we are in a battle for democracy for itself, which also means there are many other things to do going on offense than just simply supporting a few federal swing state candidates. A lot of these things aren't even partisan. It's registering voters at food banks and health clinics and rec centers, because a big part of the attack on democracy is suppressing votes. So let's get those people back on the rolls. It's every mayor of any city who's a Democrat using every public-facing part of that city to register those voters. I don't care if it's public housing, transportation. They're using most of their time in these state houses attacking the voters they don't like. If you're a mayor of a Democratic city, or which is almost every city, why aren't you using your power to re-enlist all those voters of yours? Your own constituents are being attacked. You should be livid about it, and you should use your power to get them back into democracy. And you can do that in you need to do it in nonpartisan ways. And the good thing is it's very easy to do that. I do think as we talked about earlier, though, so there's a lot of local, state, in between work to be done. It's every person deciding to do that work. It's every person seeing that they are on the front line of the democracy battle. They haven't been told that, but it's true. So that my hope is empowering. It also means there's a lot more they can do. By the way, if people are interested in this, on my website, savedemocracy.us, I walk through a lot of what people could do. But then going on offense is also federal. We need our federal leaders, knock on wood, if we can succeed this year. When we failed a couple of years ago, we had majorities. They need to see this as the crisis that it is. It needs to be the guarantee clause, the Voting Rights Act, getting it reauthorized, ending gerrymandering, ending purging. These need to be top priorities whenever we have a chance at the federal level to do it again. Because the filibuster is not a legitimate obstacle to the laws that are protecting democracy itself. It just doesn't, and I go through this in the book. Once you realize there's a guarantee of a Republican form of government in every state, some procedural rule is not sufficient to keep politicians from fulfilling a guarantee they take an oath to fulfill. So there's everything from that federal level, but it starts, and I know it's a long answer, it starts with individual activism. Every citizen deciding, I have a powerful footprint in this world, way beyond my political footprint, and I'm going to use every part of my footprint that makes sense to lift democracy. And if we do that, I think we win. If we don't, there's a very big scale of the side attacking democracy. If we don't, each of us figure out how to use our footprint, which is you and I are doing right now, for example, then I think the billions being spent, the full-time work by, these state houses, it can win. I mean, democracy has sunk in America before. It's too close right now. It's sunk in other countries before. It can succeed if we don't all figure out how do we find within our own footprint in this world doing creatively all the ways we could be fighting for democracy. If we all do that, I think there's more than enough time to save the day. That's why I wrote the book, Saving Democracy.
You come back to a term a lot, and it's scaling up, right? Like how each of us, we can use our whole footprint. Maybe we're only using part of it right now. We can each do a little bit more, or we can each rope in our networks and scale up. So, just thinking of my little platform here, what can I be doing better? How can I move up to the next level? And maybe our listeners right now, how can they level up, scale up, and maybe bring their networks into the fold?
The way it starts is, and it's what I try and do every day. And again, if people go to Save Democracy, you see it in the book, but I provide a free version online. Go to savedemocracy.us. Literally there, I have a footprint, a piece of paper, a worksheet. And I say to people, before you do anything else, just fill it out. Your network of friends, family, where you went to school, where you work, the church you go to, where you volunteer, where you give money. All the things you do, mostly these will be things that aren't part of your political life. And for most of our lives, we've kept our political life separate from all these other things we do because we think, it's partisan, it's too much, people won't like it, it'll be awkward. But once you realize, no, we're in a battle for democracy itself. And most of the things to lift democracy are not partisan. They're civic. Registering people to vote is like volunteering at the homeless shelter. That's how we should see it. It's not, it's not saying, hey, come to my fundraiser for Sherrod Brown. I mean, do that too, but that feels more political. You only are going to invite certain people to that. But registering to vote, people have been purged, that's like volunteering at the homeless shelter. Mm-hmm. And once you make that list of your footprint, and I also go through this website, and you realize so much of the activity that we could do to democracy is not simply partisan stuff. My hope is people will see there's all sorts of things they're doing every day that can be in people they know that if asked could do the same thing, communication channels they have like you and I do, all of it could be put to a much higher use for democracy than we typically do. We typically spend a little time volunteering at the end of a campaign and we give some money. Most people don't do even that, but that's the extent. So I say those are two little toes on your footprint, but all these other things are bigger. And one way to think about it, I'll give examples. The Board of Motor Vehicles decided years ago, thanks to legislation, hey, we'll register everyone coming through our door, or we'll ask them. Mm-hmm. That's massive scale. And they're interacting with people who aren't showing up to register to vote. They're showing up for something else. So think about the things that you're involved with. If I always use the food bank. Do you volunteer at the food bank, or are you on the board? You're like a Bureau of Motor Vehicles. You're interacting every day with people who are more than likely disproportionately part of the purging of voters, or they're suppressed, or they just don't vote because they don't think it matters to them.
All right, David. So I know we're getting on toward the end here, and you got to get running. So, what did I miss here today? What's the one big takeaway?
I mean, we covered a lot of it. Here's what I'd say we missed, and this is easy to miss. Everything we've talked about today is quite dark. It sounds terrible. And we've talked a little bit about my prescription of how we go on offense. And that's not just theory, and it was when I first started writing about it in the first book, but what we've learned in the last couple of years is when people do what I'm describing, it's worked. There is a winning streak for democracy right now in America that no one talks about because we only focus on federalists and federal that. Mm-hmm. And it started when people went on offense. Where did we go on offense? Kansas in August of 22 after Dobbs. And the reproductive freedom side won 60-40. Where do we go on offense? We figured out who the election-dying Secretary of State candidates were in November of 22. In a year where we normally lose because we have the White House, almost all of them lost. I know in Indiana that didn't happen, but in Nevada, Arizona, New Mexico, Michigan, swing state election-denying Secretaries of State candidates and governor candidates who would have appointed people like Kari Lake or Mastriano crushed. Mm-hmm. They did the worst on their tickets. We flipped the Michigan State House, the Michigan Senate, the Pennsylvania State House. First time in decades, 60 years, that we were winning state houses in a year where we had the White House in that midterm. That doesn't happen. It's because people focused. People went on offense. They tried to win state houses. Then we win Ohio special elections in August. We protect freedom in November. Flip the Virginia State House in November of 23. Flip the Wisconsin Supreme Court April 23. Like, this is all counter-historical. So and people around the country were contributing and helping and calling and giving in these races. 70% of Moms of Liberty candidates lost in November 23. So people took that energy to the school board level. We replaced Santos with a Democrat in New York because we had a much higher turnout than New York's had lately. The Alabama special election after the IVF decision, Democrats flip a Trump seat. And by the way, unlike 22, far more people are running this year. Florida's down to 1 or 2 uncontested races versus 30 2 years ago. North Carolina went from 30 uncontested 2 years ago to 2. So what I would say that we're missing is there's actually a winning streak. When we go on offense, when we focus beyond a few federal races, we're winning. And we're winning in ways that you don't expect to win when you have the White House. We did not win in 10 and 14. We got crushed in those years. I felt it. I was a candidate. So the lesson is that you actually can succeed. It's succeeding. And the lesson in the presidential year is don't forget that. Of course we need to beat Trump, but that is necessary but not sufficient. We have to also win the Arizona State House so they stop doing what they did a couple years ago, and that's only a seat away from being won. We have to preserve the new majority in Pennsylvania. We have to get ourselves out of a supermajority in North Carolina that's artificial because of gerrymandering. We have to win a Supreme Court race in Ohio. We have to end gerrymandering in Ohio. That will be on the ballot. Protect reproductive freedom in Florida and Missouri. It will be on the ballot. And the good news, we have to run everywhere in these places and help the people running in tough districts. And the good news is, unlike the past sort of backward vision that all these things sort of take away from our federal goals, the truth is the fact that we have a candidate running in every district in Arizona helps Joe Biden.
Yes.
It helps win the Senate seat. It means more people are turning out. It means more people are hearing the Democratic message. It means they can't claim to be for infrastructure that they voted against without a candidate of ours saying, you didn't vote for that. Why? How can you take credit? So the lesson is, it's not too late. It's June. Go on offense for democracy at multiple levels this year. It's the best thing for Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, in winning the Senate and the House. But it's also the best thing for democracy more deeply, because the races I'm talking about are the ones that in the long run we have not been paying attention to. We've been losing democracy because of it, and we can gain back a much more healthy democracy if we start focusing on. So let's keep that winning streak for democracy going. And that means don't allow a big federal year to be the only thing you think about. Also think about all the other things on the ballot that impact democracy. So we can close on an uplifting note like that.
That, you know what? That sounds like a great place to stop this thing. I do feel hopeful. I'm ready to run through a wall for democracy, and I hope everybody listening is just as ready. David Pepper, thank you so much for joining me here.
Like I said, I feel very close to Hoosier land, and I feel for what's happening there just like I do here. You guys deserve, as a blue state not that long ago, the downward spiral you're seeing like we are on issues like school vouchers and democracy, it's just painful to watch. And thanks for reaching out, and I'm happy to help whenever I can lift democracy in your state as well as mine.
Thank you very much, sir. Appreciate everything you do.
Take care. See ya.
Once again, that was lawyer, author, professor, activist, former elected official, and all-around champion of democracy, David Pepper. In summary, our founding fathers may have unshackled themselves from royalty, but they did not establish a government immune to the concentration of power in the hands of a concentrated aristocracy. Fearful of true democracy, they built several minoritarian features into the system to check the power of the people. I mean, first of all, at that time, the people only meant white men. But even then, the wealthy merchants and slave-owning planters who gathered in a sweaty, stuffy, sweltering old Pennsylvania State House in Philadelphia in the summer of 1787 without a mandate to do so, mind you, created a new form of government that allowed a fair amount of democratic input. Legitimately a novel concept at the time. But constrained the will of the people with manufactured checkpoints. The Senate, the Electoral College, the Supreme Court, any of which could shut down progress. And those are just the ones codified into law. First past the post voting, gerrymandering, voter suppression, the drawing of state lines themselves, more artificial mechanisms used to corral the populace into units more easily controlled by elites. This is the creation called liberal democracy. Liberalism is centrism. It has always been a hedge, a balancing act between democracy and authoritarian oligarchy. Remember this whenever the right attacks liberalism. They don't want any democracy. The history of our country has been a contest between these two forces. I mean, really, I think the human condition is a contest between these two forces. Anyway, contrary to popular belief, the Constitution was not handed down by God, but fought over, haggled, and hashed out by men. The original Constitution that came out of that convention received so much pushback, was so anti-democratic, that the Bill of Rights was added. Progress, backlash. Progress, backlash. Civil War and Reconstruction, Southern white backlash. Immigration, nativist backlash. The labor movement and progressive era, business backlash. The New Deal, more business backlash. Civil rights, more white backlash. Obama, still more white backlash. Republicans and their billionaire owners have spent the last 50 years chipping away bit by bit at the foundation of democracy in our country. They have perfected the art of exploiting all those anti-democratic mechanisms built into this buggy beta version of liberal democracy we're still running here in 2024. The overuse of these tools, the de-democratization of America, leads to perverse incentives for our lawmakers and poor outcomes for the rest of us. Look at gerrymandering, which leads to uncontested districts, resulting in extremism because the only challenge incumbents face is in the primary. And contrary to popular belief, I assert this does not result in both parties moving toward their ideological extremes. It results in both parties moving right toward the money. What are we, the people, to do about it? First, recognize that the authoritarian team has been playing a different game than us, consolidating power at the state level. We need to get in that game and go on offense. Run everywhere. Register voters everywhere. Make saving democracy part of your daily life. I've said it before, and I will say it again. We all must vote. Voting is necessary, but it is not sufficient. We have to make sure our friends and family also vote. Donate to candidates if you're able. Volunteer for campaigns. Make phone calls. Send texts. Write postcards. Talk to every single one of your friends and neighbors. The stakes have never been higher. We are in the middle of incredibly trying times. There will be losses and setbacks. But democracy has quietly been on a winning streak. It took the oligarch class 50 years to dismantle the foundation of a robust democracy that was built from the 1930s through the 60s, death by 1,000 blows. And may very well take another 50 years to rebuild, brick by brick by brick. Just like laying a foundation, democracy is built from the bottom up. David Pepper's out there laying bricks every day. Wouldn't you like to be a Pepper too? Thank you for listening, and thanks again to my guest, David Pepper, for my money, the best political communicator in the business. Again, the books, Laboratories of Autocracy and Saving Democracy are essential reading. I will link to his author page at bookshop.org in the show notes. Visit his website, savedemocracy.us, a one-stop shop for all the resources you'll need to start making the act of saving democracy part of everything you do. Also, subscribe to his Pepperspectives Substack at davidpepper.substack.com. Finally, if you can afford to support this project financially, a paid subscription at scottaaronrogers.substack.com goes a long way toward helping me expand my pro-democracy footprint. That's where you'll find everything I publish. You can also find me on Facebook, Blue Sky, YouTube, and TikTok at Who's Left, and on most other social media sites at ScottRodge78. If you want to send me a message, my DMs are open on social media, or email me at scottrogers78@gmail.com. Forward the show to a friend, and have them forward it to another friend. Let's keep building this project and democracy brick by brick. Until next time, this has been the Who's Left podcast. I'm Scott Aaron Rogers. Love each other, Indiana.